Okay, we're going to move on now. You know, we've heard yesterday and today a lot of talk about the digitalization of our world, of our economy, and the fact that a lot of jobs are going to be lost and that we're actually going to have fewer people doing things that they do now. So I'm happy that our next keynote speaker is going to talk about humanizing the digital workplace. So please give a round of applause. There he is, Dean Douglas. Dean, come on out.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Last year, when I was here, I talked about a new way to work and how our organizations really needed to think about our employees and how they worked better. And so we talked about this new way to work. But, you know, as we learned a lot about the new way to work and how people interact with each other and how these virtual teams interact, it's more and more prevalent that we really need to be thinking about the humanization of work. I heard somebody recently talk about the fact that it's about the technology. No, it's about the user experience. And we really need to be thinking about that user experience because, frankly, if the users don't use the technology, it's worthless. And so we really need to find a way to engage with our employees so that they really think that the technology they're using, the way they're working, is comfortable, it's natural, and it's the way they want to work. And with that, we'll garner the productivity gains and the experiences that we want to garner. So I'm going to talk for the next half hour about some of the experiences we've seen in the marketplace with regard to what's happening today, what's working and what's not working, and how we feel organizations ought to be thinking about humanizing that whole digital workplace and what the workplace should look like going forward. So when we think about the digital workplace, many people think about BYOD, bring your own device and remote workers, and that's the digital workplace. Well, really, it's a lot more than that. And while this is sort of an awkward slide, it's funny, a guy looking at his device while he's drinking something, the fact is that people are working in environments like their kitchen or their den or maybe walking the dog. And they're really doing something very, very different than you would expect even in a remote workplace. And we need to capture that and understand that and figure out how we leverage that in terms of building those teams and making those teams much more collaborative. So we defined 4 key areas that we think are the elements of a digital workplace in order to frame the discussion and how you humanize that digital workplace. So when you think about it, you know, the obvious was the remote workplace or anywhere worker. But really the other things are creating those virtual teams. And we talk a lot about virtual teams, but what are virtual teams? Well, virtual teams are groups of people working on a project or in an organization that trust each other, that really do collaborate with each other. It's more than the collaboration tools. They enjoy working together and engaging with each other. Because when they're remote, when they're not in the office environment, they've got a lot of other distractions that can keep them from engaging with people. Whereas if you're working in an office in a bullpen environment, you really do have to work with the people that you're set about with, and you may not like them, so you don't go to lunch with them. But in a remote environment, if you don't like them, you just don't work. And so you really have to have that virtual team that exists. Obviously, you need the right tools from a collaboration standpoint in order to address that opportunity to work together and facilitate that working together. And then, of course, the digital security is essential in going forward. It provides the right level of trust for the enterprise, and it provides the right level of trust for the employee as well. These are a couple of interesting stats, and they're unique, as well as unique in terms of what they say, and in combination, they are pretty compelling. So the first piece is that there are now 1.3 billion remote workers. 1.3 billion remote workers. That's 20% of the population of the world. Not of the workforce, but of the population of the world. So 1.3 billion, remote workers. But only 13% of those really feel as if they're engaged, fully engaged in the work that they do. Somehow they're disaffected in what they do, and so you've got a massive population of remote workers and mobile workers, but they're not feeling as if they really are engaged in the workplace. They somehow feel isolated. They somehow feel as if they're not engaging properly. They somehow feel that something that they're doing or others are doing is not moving them forward so that they feel fully engaged, and they'll never feel fully actualized as a result. In fact, the manifestation of this in a study that was done recently is pretty horrific. Because when employees feel disaffected, when those remote employees feel disaffected, the productivity drops dramatically. I mean, 90% innovation effectiveness drop. 90% innovation effectiveness drop. A plunge in trust amongst employees. So when I talked about those virtual teams and how important they were to have trust amongst each other, that plunges when employees feel disaffected. And then, of course, as a result, there's a massive decline in jobs getting done on time or when promised. So we've got to reverse that. We've got to find a way to address that. And it really comes down to 4 key elements, right? It's business culture. Does the business allow for this to happen? Does the business allow for the virtual team to really work as a virtual team? The digital workplace to really be such? Or are we trying to have an environment where decision-making continues to be tops down and people just happen to work out of their houses? And that's disaffected. That's dysfunctional. That's not where organizations want to be. The culture may drive that behavior, the culture may drive that outcome, but the culture needs to change if they're going to be effective in managing this virtual workplace, this digital workplace. Existing tools need to be updated. In fact, many of the tools, as I'll talk about later, have to be totally revamped. You know, older model tools, of course, need to be revamped, but even relatively recent products, products that are just a few years old, like GoToMeeting or WebEx or other products along those lines, they're just not cutting it in today's world. They are not where employees want to be in terms of collaboration and effectiveness amongst a team that's working remotely. And so there's a lot that needs to be done with existing tools as well as new tools going forward. Once again, the user experience. If users do not feel comfortable with the tools and the capabilities they have to work with, they're not going to engage. They're just going to ignore. And then, of course, privacy has to be maintained. I was talking with a number of folks, and they talked about how they have 2 different devices. And they have 2 different devices, one personal, one business, because they just don't trust the company they work for. And the company owns the technology that they were using, so they had another one for their private lives. Not that they're doing anything untoward during the workday. They just had personal conversations they were having with others during the course of the workday, and they wanted to keep them personal. So privacy is essential. Security for the employee is essential as well. Let's talk a little bit more about tools, because I think that the tools piece is something that we really tend to ignore. We think that the tools are out there anyway. We'll just buy a bunch of tools and load them up. But when you think about tools, many of the tools are fragmented, and many of the capabilities we have are such that people are switching from app to app to app. Now, I don't mean iPhone apps. I mean going from texting to email to looking up something in a Google search or whatever, and then going back to email. And every time they pause, are disrupted, and go back to that new app or change apps or go back to the original app. It's really a productivity nightmare for the employee. And it's not the employer that suffers. Well, the employer suffers. But the employee feels very, very much as if they're not getting the things done that they want to get done. In today's world where information is so important, but it's the sharing of information. You know, when I was growing up in business, information was power. The more information you had that your peers didn't have, the more powerful you were. Well, things have changed a lot. It's more about how you share this information, how you get everybody else to understand what you're seeing, what you are reading about, what you think is going to be happening based upon the inputs you're getting from other parties. And that sharing of information is critical. But if you're hopping from app to app to app in order to be able to share that information, it's extraordinarily discouraging. And as a result, any workers feel isolated. They feel as if they're lost because they can't walk over to the next desk and share some piece of data that they have, or talk about some piece of data that they've discovered, or some insight that they've read about. They have to try and communicate using electronic means, and if those electronic means are not something that they're comfortable with, then they're going to be disaffected and isolated. You know, this chart is an interesting chart because it could say work-life balance or work-life integration as well. You know, when I was a manager, first-line manager, we were very, very focused on employees not burning out. And the way you kept employees from not burning out is you stressed work-life balance, which meant you come to the office and you work for 8 or 10 hours, and then you get home and you spend time with your family, or you spend weekends with your family. But there was a definition, office, and there was another definition, home or personal time. And that work-life balance was important in order to keep people motivated, sharp, aggressive, and not burning out. Well, today, it's gone. It's really work-life integration. People are working on things while working on things that are work-related while they're doing personal things at home. They're taking care of the kids, they're walking the dog, they're doing all kinds of other things that interest them, they find intriguing and captivating. And as a result, it really is a work life that's integrated as opposed to a work life that's really segmented or separated in the old days. And so this chart sort of describes that as you think about work and life in the old paradigm and how they started to come together when you worked remotely. But today, it really is blended. And this is an important fact to know, because when you think about employees, they're looking at flexible work lifestyles. They're thinking about the way they interact with each other personally as well as professionally. They're thinking about a number of other things that you would not say is productive in terms of the classic work experience, but is very productive in the way in which they think they're driving forward in their work. And it doesn't matter if it's an engineer, a marketing person, a salesperson, any one of a number of different disciplines. They're all thinking about these kinds of things. And, you know, part of it is the choice of devices and different OSs and the like. But the fact is, they're trying to interop in a work environment, and interop, it's kind of an old term, interop in a human environment, but that really drives for a much more flexible work style. And so when you think about what that means to your organization, it means a lot. In fact, almost 50%, 43% of the people said that they would forego a 10% raise. And these days, a 10% raise is a pretty substantial raise. They would forego a 10% raise if they could have more flexibility in their work life. And more than a third said they would leave a company to join another company if they could have more flexibility in their work life. These are huge, huge insights into the psyche of our employees and what makes them think and tick and what makes them happy or motivated. The fact that so many of them would forego a very significant raise in order to have a more flexible work lifestyle doesn't mean they're going to work less. I don't think many of them are saying, I need more vacation time. They just want more flexibility. And the fact that many of them would leave, a third of them would leave their companies for that flexibility, not more money, not a better title, flexibility is very, very compelling. So I've talked a lot about some of the things that we really need to be focused in on and is not working in the remote workplace and in this digital workplace, because we think about it as a workplace that is just remote. And we really need to be thinking about it as a virtual workplace going forward. So how do you engage? How do you have employees engaged? Because that's the fundamental of humanization, right? We're social animals. We want to engage. And how do you really capture that essence? So first of all, you have to appreciate the fact that the paradigm is gone where teamwork is something the manager assigns a bunch of people to do and go have them do it. Teamwork is personal. The fact is teams are expected to engage, and they do in an office environment because they have to. But teams are expected to engage in a remote environment as well. And in this virtual digital world, they have to engage because it's important to get the job done, but it's also voluntary. And so teamwork is personal, and you've got to appreciate that you've got to have the tools, the capabilities that engender trust so that you truly can have that teamwork. How do you engender trust? Well, you engender trust by making sure that people are engaged. They are talking with each other. They have not only formal but informal contact. They really do appreciate the opportunity to talk and work with each other. If you look at Unify, Unify is a global company, and as a global company, we've got senior executives, that is my direct reports, that are based all over the world. And the company I came from, senior executives based all over the world. And when you think about how do you communicate with those folks effectively, and then without working 24/7, and then also how they communicate effectively with their teams based all over the world, you really do need to have not only frequent contact, but that informal dialogue that is critical for the success of the organization. As I mentioned earlier, in the past, it was all about keeping knowledge to yourself. Here, we need to understand that sharing knowledge really drives cooperation and collaboration amongst teams. Vibrant conversations, engaging conversations that are using multiple technologies in order to have those conversations are critical. They have to be two-way, of course. There's nothing worse than somebody going through a 50-page PowerPoint chart on an hour conference call. But you really need to be thinking about engaging better with other tools too. Texting, video, and other collaboration types of technologies allow for much more vibrant communications and the impression that you're there all working together as well, as opposed to on the end of a phone line somewhere. There's been a lot of talk about consumerization of IT, but there's some truth to that. There is some truth to the fact that consumer technology companies that started in the consumer space are really driving a very, very different set of interactions. And so when you look at Google and others, they're at the forefront of creating those collaborative technologies. They're at the forefront of really driving a lot of collaboration because they have to do it amongst millions of users in a setting where, as consumers, you have a lot of choices. And so they've created some tools and some capabilities that we need to embrace. And we need to think about how we use those tools to go forward, or at least the technology around those tools to go forward. The problem is when you go through this process and you just tick the boxes without thinking about what it means to your teams, you really start to get to what happens here. And what happens here is that everybody brings their own tools. Everybody's tools do not, because they're individual tools, do not collaborate. And oh, by the way, they come with viruses and all kinds of other nonsense that you have to wrestle with, and they can't be brought together in a cohesive whole. And so when they can't be brought together in a cohesive whole, much more significant support charges, much more significant integration charges, and once again, the employees are disaffected. So what we really need to be doing is to create a platform that we can all use, a platform that organizations really can take advantage of that humanizes that user experience, that talks to the things, the gaps that I was talking about over the last 20 minutes or so. You know, how do we create the right collaboration, trust, interaction that allows employees to work together and be productive? Not much more productive, just productive. Much more productive than they are today. So it really does require a new design, a new approach to how you take advantage of technology. So instead of thinking about technology in the way in which technology works, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, the old Microsoft system, where you just sit there and you look at emails and you look at files and you look at storage and you look at all kinds of other technologies that are identify and retrieve one piece of data at a time, identify that data, retrieve that data, identify new data, retrieve that data, respond to it. You really need to be thinking about it the same way the brain works. You know, the fact is that the brain, the human brain, is a machine that takes in all kinds of different inputs and provides all kinds of different outputs. And it does it in an extraordinarily fast way, and it does it in many ways a truly random way, but it's the way our brain works. And if you can create tools that really make you work the way the brain works, it's going to be intuitively more collaborative and something that employees are going to just understand and appreciate more. So when we think about conversations, we need to think about those conversations. We need to think about those interactions with our other employees or our virtual teams as not just contextual, not just content, not just about how you maintain continuity in the conversation, not how you engage in the conversation, not how you collaborate, but all of those things. How do you do all of this and do it all at the same time? And so what we've been working on and what we think is important is to think about all of these technologies coming together in a natural way, in a natural cognitive way that you think about the way you do anything else. Memories, thinking about how you think about a film. So we do video at work. Think about a film. You know, you don't think about, well, there's the title of the film, so I'll go look that up. And then there was a couple of speaking parts, so I'll look up all the different speaking parts of the different characters, and then I'll go look up the video that accompany those speaking parts. So you've got the script and the video and the title. No, you think about the movie. You think about what was interacting and going on all as a single cohesive whole. It's all one vision. It's all one visage. And it's truly something that is cognitive. And that's the way we ought to be thinking about facilitating tools for our teams so that they can have that same interaction, that same memory, that same understanding. And oh, by the way, they can retrieve it. So humanizing the workplace really does create business value. It creates business value because it allows for that productivity to be captured. The promise of the virtual teams, the promise of the remote worker, the promise of the digital workplace was always about creating greater productivity, not less. And where the gaps have been is that we look at the digital workplace as just an extension of the way in which we did IT in the past, and just an extension of IT tools that existed in the past. We've got to start all over again. And if we do, we'll get better productivity, we'll get better engagement, we'll get better attention. The enterprise will really benefit from this, and the employees will be much, much happier. So we've got a product, a real product, that gives you a feel for what can be done in this space. And I'd ask you to take a look at it and see what this product is, because it will give you a feel for where the marketplace is going, where the technology is going, and the kinds of tools you need to bring on board. Now, this tool is unique today, but it's not going to be unique tomorrow, and you really need to be thinking about how you think about this environment and how you want to enable your workers going forward. Because if you don't think about how you enable your workers going forward, you're not going to capture the opportunity that exists with these virtual teams, with the digital workforce, and the promise that it provides. So let's continue the conversation. We're in Hall 13. This is a picture of our booth. Stop by and we'll show you what we're talking about. And with that, thank you very much for your time.
Dean, thank you very much. Any questions for Dean? We've got a few minutes before we have to move on to the next one. Any questions? Is there any sense of relief that someone's actually talking about humanizing the digital workplace for a change? Yes? No? Yes? Of course. Good. I mean, are you getting positive response when you're talking about this from people? Because all this week we've been hearing a lot about people being pushed to the side somewhat by this movement.
You know, we're hearing a lot of positive things about it because it really is about the people. I mean, the companies are trying to find a way to retain their people and make them more productive.
Okay.
And the traditional tools just aren't getting there. Mm-hmm. And so now we're seeing an opportunity to take new tools, new capabilities, new thoughts about how people work together, especially those in the digital workplace, and tying them all together in a much more collaborative way. And if we can accomplish that, if we can create that dynamic that allows for people to trust each other and communicate more effectively, they will not be disaffected, and I think organizations will see the benefit.
I mean, isn't it actually kind of a dangerous situation? And at the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about, what was it, 80% of the 1.3 billion people who you said were, telecommuters or were those types of workers, felt like they were not fully engaged?
That's right.
I mean, that's a huge number, right?
Absolutely. It is. It's a horrific stat,
yeah,
if you think about it, because we're investing so much in order to enable those workers to work remotely and have the digital tools that we think they need.
And they don't feel fully engaged. So
because it's not the right tools. The tools are from a different generation, both in terms of technology generation, but also a generation that developed them. They were developed by my peers, and that succeeding generation, the Gen Xers, you know, Gen Xers are 2 generations away from where we are today.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
How do you know, though, that maybe they are not fully engaged because they don't like the work?
You know something? I think that people, it's an excellent question. Actually, it really is.
Yeah, how do you know?
People do not go and work for, most people, do not, talented people especially, do not go to work for a company and take a job that they're not going to like. Most people realize, especially today, that they're going to be working a lot of their life, and they want to do something they enjoy. That's part of the problem. You know, when you think about millennials, millennials will not make long-term commitments. You cannot get a millennial to take out a mortgage, and you know, think about 30 years from now, right? They're thinking about 3 weeks from now, maybe 3 years from now, but not much longer than that. And so people with that mindset are not taking jobs just to do something. They're taking jobs because they're interested and they want to do a good job. And they're being disaffected, and that's causing the productivity problem.
All right, very good. Dean, thank you very much. Give him a round of applause, everyone.